Hello, welcome to week 8 in our course, The Theology and Ethics of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. During this week, we will gain more clarity as to Bonhoeffer's view and place of ethics and his preference for the language referring to God's commandments and mandates as they are revealed in Jesus Christ. You will see Bonhoeffer that at points may sound, again, rather conservative. For example, in his defense of the authority that comes from above, oben, the place of obedience, his understanding of the family, etc. Yet within this conservative view, he launches, in my view also, a progressive challenge to the contemporary destructive forces that he saw both in the heritage of liberal individualism, we could call it that way, as well as in reference to the totalitarian tendencies of Nazism and these novel ideas of race and community, understood as united by a common Germanness. So in the first essay, The Ethical and the Christian as a Topic, Bonhoeffer begins with a rather critical view of ethicists and ethical systems, noting that defining general moral principles are insufficient and inappropriate in the arena of everyday life. And pay attention to this. Bonhoeffer is very concerned with this ordinary aspect of everyday life. So ethics leads to, or may lead to, an obsession with the ought, with the obligation, let's say, creating a mood that is characterized by moralization, judgment, and attempting all the times to meddle, right, in the life of people, which is what pretty much, churches are very accustomed to do, especially, in our context. But I will leave that to you to make your own conclusions, to draw your own conclusions as you read the text of Bonhoeffer. So for Bonhoeffer, echoing the book of Ecclesiastes, everything has a time, not only a time for earnest moral considerations and deliberations. Certainly, we do have times where this is an imperative, what we can call the heavy moments of life, claiming a decision. But life is also these times for playing and to be less than serious, what we can call the light aspects of life. And Bonhoeffer is very interested in that dimension as well, or in these dimensions, no, they're plural. Thus, on a positive note, Bonhoeffer places the role of ethics as an ultimate word, a word that appears as what he calls a boundary event, appearing in moments of historical, cultural, and social emergencies, as it was the fact, it was the case during his time. Yet, he also says that the task of ethics and the role of the ethicist is not to regulate life, this attempt to control how we ought to live, but the role of ethics is to, and this is very important, is to help people to learn to live with others, to learn to live with others, as though we can eventually become our own pedagogues, so to speak, in this art, in this adventure of living. So I would like for you to meditate and reflect a little bit on the passage found in page 370 towards the bottom, which says, living with others means living within the boundaries of the ought, though not motivated at all by the ought, in the midst of the abundance of the concrete tasks and processes of life with their infinite variety of motives. So think a little bit what he's trying to convey with this idea of learning to live with others. Next, Bonhoeffer deals in this essay with what gives authorization to the ethical discourse, right? And here he will move beyond the realm of ethics to the realm of God's commandments, which not only prohibits and commands, but it gives also permission. Permission for what? Permission for living truly, we could say. So we will revisit Bonhoeffer's notion of mandates, for example. He will again deal with this important concept that we have already studied. And he will see that God's commandments are God's concrete speech that is addressed to us through these different mandates, in this case, church, family, work, and government. In sum, God's commandments authorizes us to live fully, freeing us from the anxiety of attempting to make of every move an excruciating decision, right? In other words, God's commandments are an authorization to live before God and one another as human beings. So it commands freedom. Themes that were also very prominent, by the way, in the leading theologian at that time, the Reformed Swiss theologian Karl Barth, very influential in Bonhoeffer's thinking. So the commandments, unlike the ethical, creates the spaces for human beings to have what we can say ordinary lives, where we can eat, drink, sleep, work, celebrate, worship, pray, and play. Note in this regard a typical Lutheran tone in Bonhoeffer, a tone that is able to appreciate the finite, the ordinary events in life as harbingers of the infinite delight. What in another context, in a more sacramental context, Lutheran theologians used to refer to as the finitum capax infiniti, right? So let's move to the second essay, The Concrete Commandments and Divine Mandate, which is an attempt to reread Luther's theology of the three orders, estate or offices. This is how they were called. In Luther and later Lutheran theology, these estates or orders refer to church, government, and family-economy, which for Luther was the same due to the nature in late feudal society, of economic activities taking place in the bosom of families, extended families. So in the case of Bonhoeffer, he revisits these categories and uplifts the fact that we are called to be human in the midst of these relational and social fields. So when you come across this notion of mandates in Bonhoeffer, or orders, estates, or offices in Luther, think about relational fields, okay? Without which we could not have life, joy, play, celebration, food, and drink. In other words, these mandates are the spaces for human beings for being or becoming truly creatures. Again, this is an unfinished chapter or essay, so he will deal more extensively with the mandate of the church, which communicates God's commandment through proclamation and private confession, Beichte. No? This private confession was a practice that was original to Luther and the Reformation, and which Bonhoeffer seeks to reinstate in the church life during his time. So you will read some statements which may sound polemical to you, especially if you have been influenced by either Lutheran Pietism or American Calvinist Arminian evangelicalism, such as that, for example, that the preacher is the mouthpiece of Christ and or of God, and that scripture belongs to the preaching office while the sermon belongs to the congregation. Many of you may be shocked, no, as you read these sentences. But remember that in one way or another, these affirmations can be traced to the Reformation itself, to Luther himself, with the notion, for example, of the office of ministry of the preacher as acting in persona Christi, no? As though the person of Christ is present when the act of proclamation and administration of the sacraments take place. But here we also have in this essay, one of the clearest descriptions of the content of Christian proclamation, which precisely is Christ. And this emphasis on the God who became human in the Nazarene. This affirms that the divine cannot be encountered anywhere else but in human form, and that in Jesus Christ, human beings are set free to be again truly human. This harks back also to Luther himself, no? And to Lutheran Christology, very much so. So he will emphasize not only this incarnational dimension, but also cross and resurrection. So Jesus Christ as the crucified, he will emphasize that in this event, God reconcile us with a godless world. A godless world. Remember that expression, because we will come back to it. And therefore authorizes us to live in this genuine worldliness, right? We don't need to become super spiritual, super Christian type of creatures. No, we are authorized to live as human beings in this apparently godless reality, no? The realm of the ordinary creation. And then he will also deal with the other dimension of his Christology, resurrection, or the risen and exalted Christ, to whom all worldly powers are subjected. And here you see the political ring to his Christology, because this echoes, of course, the Bethel Confession, and especially the Barmen Declaration that we have already read. So many passages in Bonhoeffer will strike you as odd. I know that, and even out of line with our more, let's say, postmodern sensibilities in matters pertaining to power, authority, hierarchy, family, gender, and so on, right? Yeah, Bonhoeffer may have known Marx and Freud, but let's say that these are not some of his main sources, for his thinking. And we come after Marx, after Freud, after Nietzsche, after Foucault, after Deleuze, Derrida, and Judy Butler, and so on and so forth. That is not the case, obviously, with Bonhoeffer. So, understandably, we have another set of sensibilities, another set of issues that we want to pay attention too. But at the same time, not to fall into an anachronistic reading, let's try to grasp what Bonhoeffer's concern is as he confronted an, this open onslaught by the Nazis of every space that God has intended for us and for the German people in order to become truly human. So this notion of being human, keep it at the forefront of your thoughts as you delve more in depth in these very interesting essays of Dietrich Bonhoeffer.